Welcome, everyone. Jon Taylor is back. It's been a bit, but I'm so happy to see him and anxious to hear what his topic is today. It's always meaningful and relevant.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be back. It's been a really long time. May, I should just plan on in the future, like, don't count on me for anything in May. We have all sorts of birthdays and anniversaries, but um, today's topic, this actually hit me this morning. I got a chance to go on a hike with a really good friend. We spent 2 hours in the mountains together this morning with my dogs, and um, I wanted to share a little part of our conversation. So there's more of a kind of a personal and reflection tone today. And then of course I put in some science for the nerds like me that like to have your brain scratched with that, but also to help make a point about why we're going to talk about what we get from groups and
Mm.
why that's important for relationships early on in recovery. So I was hiking with this friend of mine and he's in 12 steps. I've done a lot of 12 steps in the past, and um, I forget what brought it up, but I asked him. I said, um, "How quickly did you feel loved and accepted and held by your 12 step group?" And he said it was the first meeting. And he told me a little bit about that first meeting. And he said, I shared everything that had gone wrong in my life and it brought me to that meeting in the first meeting, which I was like, whoa, man, like that's big in your first meeting. And he said, I did not feel an ounce of judgment in that. Um, I felt accepted, I felt understood. And he said, for the first time in the crisis in my life, I felt like there might be hope for me. And so we were sharing back and forth, and I told him, I said, I got that eventually in 12 steps, but I said it took me about 5 or 6 different meetings to really get that experience. And not meetings in the same group. I said my desperation allowed me to stick with it and shop around and to trust what people were saying, that this is helpful, and when you find a good group you'll feel it. And so we were talking about these different experiences, and it got me thinking about kind of both of our recovery journeys and what an important role it played. And I think about this in my work every week. I have a process group with 6 men right now, that have the core of this group's been together for 6+ years now. And I think about this every week when they walk in. We recently added a new member to our group, and we got to see this all over. That the gifts that people give us when we walk into a good, healthy recovery space are critical for our early success in recovery. So this like no judgment, tell us who you are, what you need, where you come from. We will understand you. We'll be here for you. Um, how transformative that was, and then how later on in recovery, and this is something that my friend was saying, he said now every time we have a newcomer, I make sure that I share about my first time coming to group and the experience that I had, um, and the hope that it gave me, that I could share vulnerably and honestly. And I started getting good help after that. So one thing I see with a lot of couples, um, whether the disclosure of infidelity or the recognition of addiction hit you out of the blue, or whether you've known for a while and it came to a head, I would say this to both parties of a relationship: you've been alone for a long time. You've been lonely for a long time. Because addiction is not something that interfaces well with connection with other human beings. There can be a pseudo connection, there can be fun, even. There can be intensity and there can be passion. But deep, deep down, that feeling of I am known, I am seen, I'm held, the feelings that I have are not just okay here, they're required here. Tell me who you are, and I will tell you who I am. Um, in systems where there's addiction, that type of intimacy, that type of real connection doesn't happen. So you've been alone for a long, long time. And here's some things that we know about isolation, what it does to human beings. In studies that they've done with people in solitary confinement in prison, we can see some of these effects setting in within 24 hours of isolation from other human beings. So here's some things that we see. There's increased rates of depression and anxiety. Um, that makes a lot of sense. My 3 year old is in this charming phase overall right now, but there's this piece of him that my joke is when I hear him at somewhere in the house say, "Dad," I'll say, "Oh, he can't smell me. Like I've got to get back in range." He has this like external perception that's not his eyes or his ears that he can tell how close his parents are, and he really needs us close right now. And kids go through that in different developmental stages. Um, when we are isolated, when we feel like we're alone, when we know we're alone, and we are small or ill-equipped to handle the troubles in our life, like it makes sense that depression and anxiety levels would go through the roof. There's a reduction of brain connections. So the neurons in your brain do not connect as robustly. They don't connect as often, as strongly as when you're in social situations. There's been some really interesting research that's come out in the past couple of years about the link between hearing loss and the development of dementia. And it makes me think in terms of how isolating that is to not be able to hear the world around you and maybe not even to realize that you can't hear it. So me being the degree of the social creature I am, I've probably abused my hearing throughout my life. So I cannot hear well sometimes, especially if there's background noise. But luckily for me, I'm watching faces, and when I can tell that like, oh, you're trying to connect with you, I'm not hearing it, I can lean in and say, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. Could you say that again? Like I want to know. But for a lot of people, you may not realize that there's a reduction in your hearing or a reduction in the social connection you have. And our brains literally, there's some good evidence that our brains can disintegrate in isolation. And again, in those solitary confinement studies, you can see the onset of psychosis again within 24 to 48 hours. It doesn't take weeks and weeks and weeks. Like our brains break down in isolation. There can be a loss of ability to interpret social cues, tone of voice, and intentions. So I think about it this way: as social as we are, none of us are innately good at it. It actually comes from practice. So when you're little tiny and you have parents who want to practice with you and understand the importance of that, you get a lot of practice that nobody has to set time aside for or try. But with each new relationship and new interaction, and also when you're with the same person over time and you both change, you have to reorient constantly and you have to practice over and over again what things mean for people. So overall, that was an interesting thing that came up in my research this morning that um, we can lose our ability to interpret social cues in isolation. We have increase in cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and a decrease in oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone and one of the hormones that makes us feel really, really good, warm inside. Heart disease and stroke are co-occurring with increases in cortisol level. So our physical health suffers in isolation. We have a weaker immune system, greater inflammation, more susceptibility to illness. Again, partially related to the increase in cortisol. And then there's sleep disruption that comes out of that too. So those of you who are in a long-term relationship, think about the impact of each one of these things, regardless of where they come from. Think about the impact of each one of these things on your relationship when you're sick, when your partner's sick, when you're depressed or anxious or your partner is. When there's misinterpretations of the outside social world, when there's misinterpretations about social cues, tone of voice, um, that's big problems in relationships. And one thing we know about addiction is folks who struggle with addiction themselves are not masters of relationships. Even the super social charming ones are isolated. And their partners will see again, like even when you didn't know what was going on, you've been alone. There's an isolative factor. The more distorted the relation or the field gets around addiction, the more isolated those relationships get. If you want evidence of that, look at the people you know, look at family members. I'm thinking about a family member of mine right now where there's an addiction going on, and that family member and their partner are more and more to the outside of the family. And it's not because the family is pushing them out, it's because um, the pressure on the dysfunction uh, comes up every time you're in relationships that are more regulated, more present, more social. So these are all, I think, an argument for if you want an improvement in your relationship, um, the hardest place to get all of the benefits of this is going to be your partner right now. There's a lack of trust. There's anger that's really understandable. There may even be a lack of desire or a lack of certainty of whether or not I should be vulnerable with you and connect with you. But we have these beautiful, ready made free pods around the world of groups of people who have been in isolation for a long time. And when you find a group that is healthy, here's what I mean by a healthy group: there's good, solid, long term recovery. There is a culture of sponsorship. Shorthand for me in that is when you walk into a room and you hear people share and you say, I want to grow up in my recovery to be like that person, my life would be better. When you have a group that has two or three of those, you have a pretty healthy group. Um, those are benefits we can start to reap from relationships early on that will help you in your relationships at home. And this is another thing that this friend of mine and I were talking about, how a lot of the work that we've done in our relationships has happened outside of our, like, our primary relationship with our spouses has happened outside of our relationship with that spouse. So that hike he and I took together this morning, we try to hike together a couple times a week. That's part of there's a benefit to both of our spouses when we come home. And it's not from the exercise, that's part of it. But the larger part is the bonding, the relaxation, the ability to explore. We laugh a lot, we think a lot. There's a benefit in that. So I see with a lot of couples in distress, it can actually be really scary to think about shifting a focus from here into my own life or into my own needs. I would say it's absolutely necessary. Differentiation is essential in relationships. I've said this before in webinars that without differentiation, there is no intimacy, there is no relationship, and that's a big part of differentiation. Is I have needs and objectives that are separate from the needs and objectives of you. And those needs and objectives may not be priority in the relationship that we make. We may not be able to take care of it in house. But when we're aware and we're accepting of that, we can say, I'm really glad you have your meeting. I'm really glad you have your sponsor. That's a good, safe place for me and for you to get some of those needs met and get that support that you need that I can't or don't, or for whatever reason, can't provide for you. So for a lot of us, when there's more stress in our relationship, the tendency is to isolate and close in. And what we often need is to open up, not the dirty laundry of the relationship, but ourselves, to open up ourselves to good relationships. So I feel really fortunate here in Utah. We have one 12-step group that when I have a client who needs 12 steps, this is the only one that I refer them to. And it's not because I don't think there's other good ones. other places. I have plenty of clients who come in who already found 12 steps before me, and they're doing great and they have an awesome sponsor. But when there is somebody who is in my office and they need 12 steps, and like I was just counting up this morning, I think there have been, I would categorize these guys this way: six crusty, scared of people men who need a very good experience in 12 steps. I send them to this group because I know what they're going to get when they walk in the door. Um, they're going to get warm, genuine, we're glad you're here. They're going to get honesty and not grandstanding. Um, I even tell them when they go to their first group, I said, if you're feeling really brave, raise your hand and say, I need a temporary sponsor. And I said, there will be about 3 to 5 people who will say, let's talk. I might be able to help you. Um, and I know because of the culture of sponsorship in that group, I know they're going to get hooked up with a really good temporary sponsor who knows how to do it and knows how to love them. Um, one guy that I worked with, he shared with me the other day. Um, he said, I talk to my sponsor every day, and my sponsor tells me he loves me every day. And this is a guy who was like,
Wow.
he was like, I think I would rather live in misery and lose everything that's important to me right now than face a 12-step group. And he had tried some other stuff before, and it just was not the right fit. And it was hard for him to get started in this, but he said, I talk to my sponsor every day, and he tells me he loves me every day. And he says, it's changing how I think about myself. And you can see that with him. And then there's all the step work that they do, which is amazing. And I look at how this guy has changed how he approaches his spouse, and they don't have the easiest of relationships. It's hard. They have a lot of hard work. But I see what happens to him when every Monday night he goes to his sponsor's house after work and they work together for about an hour and then he goes home. And I see what happens in those daily calls, and I see what happens when he goes to his meeting. A couple months ago, he picked up his first sponsee, and I asked him how that was going, and he said, it started out as awkward, but I can tell him every day, I love you. And he's like, I have that to give, and I feel it back. Um, to me, that's a really good case example. I have a lot more of what can open up in relationship possibility. If for a moment you can say, my total solution isn't straightening all this out with you. Part of my solution is for me. I need volunteers in my life. I need people who have my back, not are going to co-sign on my bowl, but who are really going to have my back, who are going to teach me, who are going to help me, who are going to love me, and also help to confront the parts of me that are not playing nice with the goals for a better life that I have. It was interesting too. We were talking this morning. So this friend of mine, he's reading a lot of the big book and things like that, and um, I forget again how this came up, but I said, for all the flaws in the foundation of AA, I said, I think it's still totally inspired by the universe, God, a higher power, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's not human. And he said, tell me more what you mean by the flaws in the founding. And I shared with him something that I've mentioned Carver Brown here before, that Carver Brown shares in his Back to Basics program. He says the opening statement in AA, you can tell it was written by addicts because they say we 100 men, and he said the actual facts are there was something like it was like 83 men and 2 women. He said so right off the back, the opening statement is an opening statement that a group of addicts would make. It's a lie, and and he opens that with humor and gentleness, and then he goes on to show it's like it doesn't have to be perfect to be very, very good. And my friend says, that's interesting because part of the 12 steps that I really struggle with, it talks about like tearing down this monster ego. And he said that praying to have defects removed. He said I actually struggled with that, and I had to re-engineer that in my mind. He said because that tied into my perfectionist, having
Mm.
the defects removed. And he said, anymore now, I don't think the game is to have them removed, but what I pray for is that I can live peaceably with my defects and I can integrate them so they don't hurt me or other people. And I said, it's important to understand that when they wrote the steps in the 30s, AA was mostly comprised of well-to-do white businessmen who thought they were God. And I said, that's the message that they needed. It was like, you're not God, humble it. And he said, yeah, there's all that talk of humility. And then he says, every now and then there's this random paragraph that is like, some people don't struggle with that. And then he said in his summary, tongue in cheek, he says, some people don't struggle with that, but we don't know anything about that. And that's all we're going to say about that. Anyway, back to this. And so even within that group, he said, I really appreciate that we can talk as a group, and we do when we study the steps, we can talk as a group about what fits for us and what doesn't. And we don't have to tear down the institution and make it fit us. We can say, my way forward is this. This is the part of the reading. This is the part of the principles that I can really use. And we talked about that. Take what's useful and leave the rest. Which, when it comes to high conflict, high stakes relationships, I can't think of a better skill to develop. Focus on what's working, focus on what you can agree on and how you come together, and save the rest for another time. And I'm not saying forever. I'm saying sometimes to get past those roadblocks and the parts of us that want to say, this isn't working for me, I'm gone, or you're impossible. Just that practice over and over again of like, hey, it doesn't all have to click, it doesn't all have to make sense. That's one thing we talked about that we were getting, and I loved thinking about what that does for our relationships. That take what's useful and leave the rest is how we get a custom fit, and not the custom fit for our comfort, the custom fit for our needs. So even the parts that challenge us, that we may hear from other people, oh, I was challenged by that, and this is what helped me. Sometimes I feel when I hear that like, oh yeah, I want to try that. I want to incorporate it. And that other times I feel like I'm so glad that worked for you. That's not my path forward. And I'll keep looking. So that custom fit to our challenges and our needs, not to our comfort. And a good 12-step group will do that. There will be challenge of that stinking thinking. There will be challenge of the denial. There can even be what I notice for some of the partners I work with, there can be some challenge of that part of us that says, I'm just consigned to live in misery, and that's my only option. When you have people who have been betrayed in heinous ways saying, I used to think that, I used to feel that, and I learned it didn't have to be true. There's challenges to the parts of us that lock in and entrench when really overwhelming bad things happen to us. So what I see overall, again, with couples who are struggling with betrayal and addiction, is you've been lonely for a long time, and there has not been, from a neurological perspective, there has not been real engagement of the social engagement systems in the brain. They're shut down, they're rusty. And in order to wake those up again, we need a couple of things. Like, first, we need regulation in our nervous system, which may or may not be a group thing. In fact, part of my friend and I's conversation was about that differentiation. We build our own peace, we build our own regulation, and our relationships are additive to that, not core to the structure. So I think I've said a little bit about my front yard remodel here. I finally dug the foundation of the driveway, and I got the paver base in, and the gravel's going to go on top in the next week. Paver base is really interesting. It's made of both like big angular rough rocks, about like an inch, not huge. And then there's some smaller gravel, and then there's a lot of fine like chipped gravel or sand. And when you put that together and you apply pressure, when you compact it, you get a very durable, hard surface with no bonding agent. Like, you could take a shovel and you could break that surface without a lot of struggle, but when you compact it, it all comes together. So in that, I look at the things that we do to provide structure and support for our being as a person. The individual stuff, that's the rocks, that's the angular stuff. I would say relationships are like that sand or that really fine stuff that helps to lock it in, but the sand doesn't support the weight. The gravel does. So in us, the personal skills we have for regulating, for knowing ourselves, like that's what provides the foundation. That's what provides the strength. And our relationships help to lock in and solidify and give structure and meaning and purpose to all of that. But they are not the source of it. So when we have that impaired social engagement system, which I'll see with couples, it's rusty if it's existent. And what I see for couples who engage in that kind of group work, which is different than with your individual therapist, there's good things that can wake up in the social engagement system, but there's corners of that, there's parts of that itch that are not scratched in one to one. It's really that group dynamic. I have seen elements of that social engagement system come alive again. One of the guys in my men's group, he's in this 12-step group that I almost exclusively refer to. And he was in our group last week. He came about 5 minutes early and he had a big smile on his face, which is not real normal for him. And he wanted to chit chat with me, which is not real normal for him. And he said, I just want to tell you about some of the things that have been happening in group. And he like face lit up. He even said, I love these people. I know that they love me. They're happy to see me. It means so much. Like, talk about a transformation to that social engagement system. In the time that I worked with him individually, most of the time in sessions, what I would hear is, I hate everybody. Relationships are stupid. I don't know why I should even try. And it wasn't this victim thing, it was like this exhaustion thing, I think, for him. So we need our social engagement systems to wake up. We need them to be able to be present and online for our relationships that have the most impact, our most intimate relationships, our partner. We need that social engagement system, but it's really high stakes with the person that has betrayed you or that you've betrayed to get the kind of safety that allows that to wake up, to get the kind of, I would call it low stakes, meaning it's not that it's not hard to share vulnerability in a group, but there's likely not going to be anybody in your group that says, I'm leaving you now because I don't want to deal with that part of your past. Now, spouses, partners, we certainly have that option with each other. I don't have to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. That's okay. That may be the truth and that may be what needs to happen. But in a 12 step group, there's not that. Not what it's about. It's about that presence, and it helps those parts of our social engagement neurological system wake up. And we bring that home and it has an impact. So for me, I always give some steps like, what can you do about this? I would say if you're not engaged in some kind of group, if you've been fighting it, please stop. Talk to someone who is involved. You might go to your therapist. Tammy knows a lot of good resources. Talk to someone about where to start and try it out. You may have the experience like my friend who he told me this morning. I won't go into detail with this, but he told me this morning, he said, I left that group and it was like a baptism into my new life. I felt washed and I felt ready. Or you might have the experience like me where I had to poke around for a while and it was hard, but I was desperate enough and I was hopeful enough that I could find it. Um, don't leave it on your list of it's not for me. Try it out. Really try it out. And when you find a healthy group, there's long-term sobriety. There's people that you want to grow up to be. Just see what impact that has on you. If you're already engaged in 12 step like this, what I would encourage you, I want you to think back to the reception you got on the first day that you went, or the reception you wish you got. And I want you to ask yourself, am I willing to give as good as I got? Or am I willing to give like I wish I had? So that relational energy that passes through, I'm passing this along, I'm welcoming, I'm loving because that saved my life and it's my gift to pass along. That would be my challenge to you if you've already started. So that's the topic today.
Great stuff. And please, questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. But, what you're just saying is a good reminder for me because I go to my meetings and I start chit-chatting with my friends. And so I need to be cognizant of the newcomer and make, like put my friends aside because I can catch up with them later and, reach out to the newcomers. So thank you for the reminder. When you were talking, and I'm going to ask you this one because I hear lots of partners who, and it's not fair, but that find it, why can, and we use gender, he go to a 12-step meeting and connect with those people? I'm here. I've been here the whole time. I'm isolated. I'm taking breadcrumbs of like, oh, we had fun at that, So can you talk a little bit about, like how do you as a partner set aside, you're right, it isn't fair, and how important this is.
I I get the yearning for that, and I don't want you to do anything with that hypothetical partner out there who might be thinking that. I don't want you to do anything with that yearning. That's good and right for you to feel. And that's actually a really important question. I've been here and I've been willing. Why haven't you given me a chance? And at some point, I hope you get an answer to that. I hope you guys can engage with that. I would also say it might be helpful for your own healing to be able to set that aspect aside and to say, there's also a part of me that wants to say, hit the bricks. I never want to see you again. I'm never going to try again with you. And when you allow yourself to fold into your own support network and your own needs and to say, this isn't about whether or not you wanted this with me or not. This is about me going and getting what I need, regardless of what you're willing to offer me. I'm not going to hang anymore on whether or not you accept me. I'm going to find acceptance. And that part of you that needs that ability to be mad and protest and distance and to say, there's a part of me that doesn't want you in here. There's parts of my life that I don't want you in right now. And to find fulfillment and validation from that, I think can only come from when you allow yourself to shut out the but why not me, and essentially to be able to pivot to um i'm I'm great. I'm pretty great. And there's a group of people that understands that intrinsic value, that don't have the history that you and I have, don't have the complaints that you have about me, or the complaints I have about myself. Like you deserve that just as much. So that's again part of that differentiation that I think is so important in couples, is you need a pocket in your life where it's not all about your relationship or what your partner thinks about you. And that's not a trick for like, don't worry about it, it'll reduce your suffering. It's what I'm talking about with differentiation. It's so important to have a place in your life where you can say, my partner doesn't matter here. It's not about them. It's about me and what I need.
When you were talking about character defects, what I learned along my journey was, many of my character defects were directly related to my character assets, but they had gone awry, shall we say. And so, it's also the right sizing and proper placement and, using them wisely, et cetera. So all of this is, I mean, this is, helpful learning. I have a wonderful husband who has been very brave multiple times, when I'm getting dysregulated, he'll say, he's so, I love him. He'll go, do you want to talk about that after your meeting? And like I learned to shut my mouth because I wanted to, of course, lash out. And I was like, this man loves me. I'm going to take, I'm going to go do this. And, I'd come back from the meeting and go, I don't even remember whatever I was dysregulated about. It no longer mattered. Having that ability to settle in, get support and having the perspective, really changes everything. So, I mean, like I said, he's a brave guy to be willing to put himself out there for that. So the isolation for partners, like, you talked about your family members, the couples, it is not just the addict that gets isolated, it's the partners. I talk to lots of partners, not all, like some have a very good social network and things, but many partners, are in the, like I can't tell anybody about this. And like it is,
Mhm.
and they have really isolated, they've pulled back. I don't talk to people because I don't want to have to like so it is really isolating. Or like I said, the breadcrumbs of like, well, but that was good. And so like we can still be, we can still be okay. So I think, we talk all the time, and we've got lots of resources for, partners as well, for the drop-in groups, et cetera. And like we encourage people to reach out to We Tonglen females, that's female betrayed partners, because we want you to have a community of people that just get it, that can understand where you're at, can help you not get stuck in it's always like you said, it's, heartbreaking to think about it's always going to be like this. I'm never going to have joy. Well, that, I always am partners, choose joy, choose to work towards your joy, regardless of what your betraying partner has done or not done, or, I mean, or continues to not do. So, it can be, that differentiation that you're talking about, can really make a difference. I had tears in my eyes, when you're talking about, the crusty people that go, when they finally give it a chance, I hear so many people that go, oh no, or I won't do 12 step, or he won't do 12 step, because he's private, he's afraid, whatever. And I'm going like, it is the thing, that changes because it's a safe place to connect. So go ahead.
Well, it makes me think about another one of my, I affectionately refer to them as crusty people, because it's the kind of crusty that I am really at my
Mhm.
core. I think of one guy, his last big hang up is he said, I don't want to be one of those people that like recovery people are my only friends and the only thing going on in my life is what's happening in the recovery community. And I said, so don't be. Like
Yeah, exactly.
I said, you're not signing up for a cult or a new
Mhm.
family. Like
Mhm.
you're going to get some help. And it's interesting. I think he was part of that community for 4 years, and then he started saying he was like that social engagement was turning on in him, and he was getting sober and really like deeply reflecting. And um, he by the way had the same sponsor that tells him he loves him every day,
Mm.
and you can see the change in that. But after about 4 years, he said, "Okay, what I want to focus on this year is." I want deeper relationships. I want better relationships. And I said, okay, like who do you have in mind? And he said, well, there's people that I've been friends with from work in the past. And he said, I want to get to know the people in my recovery group better. I want to spend more time with them. And I started chuckling a little bit. And I said, do you remember how afraid you were? This is going to become your whole social community. And he said, I don't have to be afraid of that anymore because I'm not choosing these people based on we're in recovery together and that has to be my whole life. He said, I've gotten to know them. And inside recovery and outside recovery, they're people who are good for me and I want to be close. And he said, I honestly didn't think it was possible to find people like that in the recovery because I thought they were just as broken as me. And I said, the miracle is if broken is the right word, they were and are. And it doesn't matter for good relationships are not about how whole we are. They're about how honest we are and how vulnerable we are. Um, so that there's a lot of excuses, and I'm not saying it's a silver bullet for everybody. There's a lot of excuses that are just that excuses not to try and really see what can happen when we have good support and relationships around us.
When I was in treatment, I've shared this before, my counselor, I call her steely eyes. She had steely gray eyes, and she looked directly through me. And I was young and terrified, but also hopeful, because they kept telling me if I do these things, it can change for you. And so I had that little lifeline of hope. But she said, if you don't make recovery fun, you're not going to make it. Like, and I all these years later, I still remember that. And so I was like, how can I make it fun? And I, unlike you, am a very social person. And so, like, we had, we had our meetings, and then we had our, there's this whole group of us that were young and single and all of that. And we did all of these things together that we would have never done if we were still in active addiction, because we were too busy in our active addiction, and that has been the course for me. And I have lots of friends who aren't in program too, but the people, when we moved out of we lived in one state, we moved to another one, that where did I make instant connection? In 12-step meetings, and guess what? My husband, who is not, he's normal. What, how did that happen? But he had that social circle too. It was great. We were riding motorcycles at the time, and he would go off on trips with my friends. They were my friends. No, they were our friends. But it was like this amazing thing. It's people with all kinds of interests and lots of opportunity.
And this doesn't have to be a template for everybody. This is another thing that I've seen over the years from both 12 step and therapy group involvement is that actually being a really important part, the relationships form being an important part of helping the family heal. So I think of from some therapy group experiences throughout my career, I think of one guy in particular. He was one of these crusty people, like, everyone's stupid. I can't stand this. Like, I'm only coming to this group because I'm desperate. Um, this particular person glommed onto a guy in the group who was single, divorced, like his whole life had fallen apart. And he told him once, he said, my mission is for you to not be alone on holidays. I want you to know that you're welcome with my family.
Oh,
And would invite him over. And it took a few before the guy was like, okay, he relented. And this person who was inviting him, like, his spouse and his children like this guy because he's a very likable person. Made some big mistakes, but a very likable person. And it was part of that, like, a gift that came out of this guy in recovery. This is a gift that came out of that, is we have this person in our life now that we wouldn't have had otherwise. And we look forward to when we get to spend time with him, when he shares a meal with us on holidays. Like, we're glad that he's here. We get to talk to him. He's interesting. He's funny. And so there's even, like, when you look at, they say it takes a village to raise a child. It also takes community to heal relationships and families. And that is one of the seed beds for this too. You get people who are invested in your life, and they're invested in your life, and when you're invested in your relationship, they're invested in your relationship too, because they're there for you. And it can really be this seed bed to enrich a lot. Like I said, that's not the end goal. It's not necessarily a template, but it's another one of those, like, the plants we plant in the spring because we need to eat in the fall. Um, there's a lot of upside that comes out of those communities.
eh, 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 you know, I know I've got Harville Hendricks, and I can't think of the quote right now in my signature line, but it's like, we break our relationships, but we heal in relationships. Like that is, par for, for addicts, is we break our relationships. It is isolating, and people will often go, "Oh, he's like, everybody loves him." And it's just like you're talking about. I can have that social facade, but the reality is I'm isolated, going, if people really knew me, so I always am holding back that piece of me. And like when you're talking initially, it's like, we have the fun, we do some things and all of that, but that core of really knowing each other and accepting each other, you can't, because I've got this whole secret life. So you can't know about that, because that's not going to go over well in our relationship. So I'm going to hold that over here, and show up for, these things in different ways. And I know, for, like I said, for partners, well, look, he can do this, so why can't he do that? And it's that, it's because of the addiction, and that, deep woundedness. But man, oh
Yeah.
man, we can transform. And like all of these stories
Yeah.
you're talking about, it's like we can transform. We aren't going to be perfect people, because, like you said, the 12-step books are full of people who, none of them got to be perfect, but we sure are better versions of ourselves than when we were in reactive addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. That reminds me of another community aspect. I was working with a client once who was part of a faith community, And doctrinally and conceptually, he rolled his eyes at most things that his faith community believed. I was working with them as a couple, and this faith was really important to his spouse. And one day she asked him, she was like, "You need to tell me why you insist on coming, because you despise everything that this church stands for." And it kind of knocked him off guard. I was so proud of him. He or her, he was this formidable litigator in his professional life.
Mhm.
And she put him on the stand. And he paused for a minute, and then he welled up and he said, "You're right." He said, "I don't know that I'll ever believe like everybody believes," but he said, "I can't think of another group of people who rallies around the idea of trying to be the best people that they can
Mhm.
be, and they work it, they work hard at it." And he said, "I need that in my life, and I love them for it." So even when and you can pick apart any part of a group or an organization, the 12 steps especially, you can pick apart flaws in the foundation, but I don't think it's about some sacred text or some sacred idea. I think that's the idea. It's the idea of a bunch of flawed people coming together who earnestly want to do better and understand the importance of helping and supporting each other in that. I think that's where a lot of the real magic happens. There's wisdom in the books and the steps for sure. But I think the real magic comes from this group of people who intentionally come together and say, if this is the only place in your week where you fill your canteen so you can make it another week, we'll fill it up with the best water there is. And it really comes from that intention and that love that is shared in a group of people, which when you're suffering from addiction, I don't know if you've realized being able to partake of that love and have people who are willing to extend it with how hard it is, that's in short supply in your life. But it's in no shortage of supply in those rooms, especially in a very healthy group.
So one of my 12 steps, which is Thursday night, so I'm going tonight, is we read as Bill sees it, and we read 6 pages. And and then you can share off those topics or anything else. But I'm going, how many times have I gone through that same information, and I'll see something a little different, or somebody will say something a little different. And there's really archaic language, and like some of this stuff is like, oh, from Bill wrote a letter in the year I was born. So it's old, and they'll use John Barleycorn, like it's really some, very, very old, fashioned stuff. But ultimately, in those 6 pages, every week, one of us is talking about, wow, we cannot believe that a bunch of, this drunks, came together and actually figured out something that could help them, stay sober, but also help millions, not just with alcohol addiction, because that was the foundation for all of the 12-step programs. So all of that has been adapted, and so the brilliance of how that, and I believe divinely inspired, because again, a bunch of drunks, our best thinking got us into the mess that we're in, that we need to go, talk to other people about, the issues. But having the ability to just be in there and look at things, and like I said, a lot of times I go, how many times have I heard this, and I never picked up on that little, that little piece of it. So if we remain teachable, we can continue to learn more. And like the person that you said that has been sponsoring people and saying I love you, to all his sponsees all over time, I suspect that he didn't go, well, I've learned enough, I'm
Yeah,
good enough, and so I'm just going to, this is working for me, I'm just going to, I'm going to stop here. It's that continuing to be willing to engage, to give. Sponsorship is not, like it's not easy. It's never about the other person. So it's like I'm doing this, for me, but it's not easy for them to be willing to be in a relationship with, a newcomer that is, pretty much a hot mess, like that. That takes willingness. So
definitely.
no questions, no
We're
questions
quiet
from
on the
any of you.
we're
I
quiet on
know
the
it's
Q
like,
and A's
oh my
today.
gosh, I didn't stop it. So yeah, yeah. We would welcome your
All good too.
questions. Yeah, we have we have a few more minutes left, but like this is really helpful. And like I said, I do hear people going, oh, they have all of the excuses. We actually, Scott and I did a webinar a few years ago on, navigating the 12 steps because there are so many myths and, like misperceptions about, the 12 steps. And in the S world, there are so many different groups. I
Hmm.
mentioned, the founder of AA, one of the co-founders is, Bill W. But um, and he has lots of letters and things that is the book, as Bill sees it. But, in the S world, there's bunches of them. I happen to be on the board of directors for SCA, which is Sexual Compulsives Anonymous. That is just one, of the many 12-step meetings or 12-step programs that is available within the, S and P world, because there's PA, PAA, SPAA, SLAA. Like we have a list on our website. You can go see them with links to all of them so that you can see. But I often say, find the, and part of that webinar was find the healthy meetings. So like, Jon was talking about, it's like, where is there good recovery? It's not just talking about, oh, I acted out again, oh, I acted out again, that people are willing to sponsor, that people are actually working the steps, because you can go warm a seat for a long time. One of the things that I heard in my 12 step, this was a couple of years ago, but I hadn't heard it or remembered it was, I did steps 1, 2, 3, 12. And I was like, oh, like I got enough and now I'm going to go sponsor people and do all of this kind of, or do whatever, and I was like, oh, and it didn't work. He went back out, came back in, and, there's 12 steps. They're in order. Like, if you work the steps, and particularly steps 4 through 9 are the house cleaning steps, all of those changes, we start to, we start to be able to navigate that. Like I said, I realized my character defects were also, used properly, they can be a positive. Used negatively, I mean, if I, it, it really was. It's like, how do I choose? This is who I am. How do I channel that to be for good rather than to the detriment of myself and everyone else? And but you know what? I needed the people in the group to teach me that. I I could have read the book 100 times myself, and I would not have. Like I needed the group.
I love that as a punctuation for those clients that I work with, but both people who struggle with compulsive behavior and their partners who will say, I'm better off, like I learn better when I read it myself. That may be true, but there's certain lessons that are not taught through the written word. There's certain things we need to experience that only happen in relationships. And again, early in recovery between spouses, you may desperately want to help each other in that way, but there's not the equipment or the safety to be able to do that with each other yet. And I say, thank God there's groups like this that are ready made equipped for like, hey, we don't have a history with you, we don't have to go home with you, but we're here with you right now. Like, let's learn those lessons, let's teach those things, let's take that armor off. Um, so something to think about if you're struggling in your primary relationship, ask yourself, how isolated am I? And like really isolated. Not do I have friends that I can go hang out with? That's good. But like do I have people who like my friend I can walk in a room the first time and I can tell them everything that's wrong with my life. And that's what it's about. Not that we're wallowing in it, but like we're not hiding or performing for each other. Um, it's huge in I think changing some of that outlook on yourself and your relationships.
Well, I'm like, I've been doing this a while, and I still am a human, and I still do things that and I go tell on myself. It's important for me to be transparent, so I go to my 12-step meetings, and I'm telling yep, here's what happened, so that I don't pretend like it didn't matter. Oh, I took care of that, or like I should be in a different. No, this is my reality of where I'm at, and those people, like you said, they're happy to see me. It's like, I walk in the meeting and if I'm never the first one there, let's put it that way. I'm always sliding in the last couple of minutes, but it's one of those things where like, oh, hi, Tammy, like that wasn't who I was when I was in my active addiction. Like, so yes, the ability to have people, that want to be, in relationship with me, and the accountability. John works with Dr. Ken Adams, who, we used to work together. He was facilitator for ITAP, and I was vice president of ITAP at the time. And there was a situation. We had a mutual person, and I'm going to own it. I had an issue resentment with that mutual person, and I was getting ready to send off a toxic email, and I thought, you should call Ken. And so I called Ken, and he listened, and I had my righteous indignation and all that, and some Tammy, you don't want to do that. And as soon as he said that, I was like, I knew there was a reason. I knew I really shouldn't do that, but I needed somebody to hear me and tell me. I needed the outside. And this is like 10 years ago. So this was not like, oh, in my first year of recovery. It was interesting.
I'm smiling because I've had a lot of conversations like that with Ken too, where I've said,
Yeah.
could you help me with this? And that outside perspective is so helpful.
Yes. So somebody did ask a question: is fake recovery and checking the boxes a different animal?
I love this question. I love this
I do
question
too.
because so in my opinion, checking the boxes, I think, has become synonymous with fake recovery, and I don't think they are the same thing at all. So let me put it this way. I was talking to my friend this morning. I was talking about, oh, I don't remember once, but I said it was one of those times in my life where I just needed help. And I said, I'm going to show up and I'm going to do whatever this person asks me, whether my heart's in it or not, because I need help beyond myself. And so it started with a lot of like, I would take notes and I would say, here's my to-dos, and I would do them. And with that attitude of like, this is not the solution, this is what I'm doing until I see what the solution is, until I know what the solution is, until I know better, can do better, whatever that is. Box checking has saved my life countless times. Um, for example, we're going to go take a camping trip out in the desert this weekend. And I have lists that I will be checking the boxes on. I am not going to wait for that to download in my heart, the preparation that we need, and just know that it's there. Like, I'm so thankful for the ability to make boxes and check them. It saves you when you don't know what else to do. Fake recovery, I would say, is more of that mentality of there's just a few things that I need to do or learn or see, and then I'll be fine. Recovery is about a deep relationship with yourself, warts and all. And that really falls outside of box checking. You can check boxes and never see the warts or have to accept.
We have just another half minute. My husband goes to meetings but refuses inpatient and any kind of therapy, all needed. Yeah, if he goes to enough meetings and he opens his ears, shuts his mouth, that's what we used to say back in the day. He can learn. So, but partner, healthy boundaries for you. What are you doing to take care of you so that you're not
Yeah.
just paying attention to him? So, and we are out of time. Come back. So good to see you again. We'll be
See
back
ya.
in 2 weeks. Bye, everyone.